I've been planning it for a while, but as every guy out there will know, it takes a certain amount of motivation to get yourself going. So I was planning it, and then it just felt really right out in Africa. It was beautiful at the time, and I had done a little bit of planning to obviously share my romantic side.
When William and Catherine announced their fourth baby's name, jaws dropped worldwide. Royal insiders couldn't believe what they were hearing. One name honored a hidden scandal. Another revealed a decades-old family secret. And the third, it broke every royal rule in the book. What happened next sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Before we reveal the name that changed everything, you need to know what really happened behind those closed doors. The morning of the announcement arrived quietly, as most significant moments in royal history tend to do.
Well, I think as any mother would be, she was absolutely over the moon. And actually we had quite an awkward situation because I knew that William had asked my father, but I didn't know if my mother knew, so I came back.
There was no dramatic fanfare, no immediate sense that the day would be remembered in the years to come. Staff members at Windsor Castle went about their usual routines, though those who had worked within the palace walls for any length of time could sense something in the air. It was the kind of subtle shift that comes before major announcements. A certain energy that spreads through corridors and offices without anyone quite being able to pinpoint its source. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had always been remarkably skilled at maintaining privacy in an age where privacy seemed nearly impossible to achieve. For months, the world had been consumed with speculation about her condition, her plans, and what the future might hold for the royal family. Tabloid newspapers had run countless stories, each one claiming insider knowledge that rarely proved accurate. Social media platforms buzzed with theories and rumors, some plausible and others bordering on absurd. Royal correspondents, those journalists who dedicated their careers to covering the monarchy, filed report after report attempting to piece together fragments of information into a coherent narrative. Despite all this attention, the palace had maintained its traditional approach to privacy. There were no leaks from staff members, no anonymous sources providing details to hungry reporters. This discretion was not accidental. It represented a carefully maintained culture that had been built over decades, if not centuries. Those who worked closely with the royal family understood that their positions required absolute trustworthiness. Breaking that trust meant not only losing their jobs, but also betraying an institution they had devoted themselves to serving. The pregnancy itself had come as a surprise to many observers. After Prince Louis was born in April 2018, most people assumed that William and Catherine had completed their family. 3 children seemed like a natural stopping point, a modern number that felt neither too small nor excessive. Their oldest son, George, born in 2013, would one day become king, carrying forward a lineage that stretched back through the centuries. Princess Charlotte, born in 2015, had quickly become one of the most photographed children in the world, her confident demeanor and natural charm winning hearts wherever she appeared. Louis, the youngest of the 3, had earned his own following thanks to his animated expressions during public events, particularly during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations for Queen Elizabeth. The Wales family had appeared complete in every sense of the word. They had the required heir and spare, as the old aristocratic saying went, plus an additional child to balance things out. Their public engagements showed a family that seemed comfortable and settled. William and Catherine had developed a rhythm in their royal duties, balancing their responsibilities with their commitment to giving their children as normal an upbringing as possible, given the extraordinary circumstances of their birth. But as Catherine herself had noted in private conversations, life rarely follows the neat scripts we write for ourselves. Plans change, circumstances evolve, and what seems certain one day can become uncertain the next. The decision to have a 4th child was deeply personal, made after considerable thought and discussion between William and Catherine. They had to weigh their own desires against the practical realities of raising 4 children in the public eye, consider the implications for their official duties, and think about how another child would affect the family dynamic they had worked so hard to create. The pregnancy had been particularly challenging. Catherine experienced hyperemesis gravidarum, the same severe form of morning sickness that had affected her previous pregnancies. This condition goes far beyond typical pregnancy nausea, causing extreme vomiting that can lead to dehydration and weight loss. It had forced Catherine to cancel numerous public engagements and retreat from view during the early months, a decision that only fueled more speculation in the press. Some publications suggested marital problems, others hinted at serious health issues, and a few simply ran with whatever theory seemed most likely to generate clicks and sales. Through it all, Catherine remained largely silent, following a pattern she had established early in her royal life. She had learned valuable lessons from observing both the successes and failures of those who came before her. Princess Diana's relationship with the media had been complicated and ultimately destructive, despite her genuine desire to use press attention for good causes. The late Queen Elizabeth had demonstrated a different approach, maintaining dignity through discretion and allowing her actions to speak louder than words. Catherine had studied both examples and crafted her own philosophy, one that prioritized her children's well-being above all else, while still fulfilling her obligations to the public. The birth itself represented a triumph of modern royal privacy management. In previous generations, royal births had been major public spectacles with crowds gathering outside hospitals days in advance. When William himself was born, the media presence had been overwhelming, with photographers camping out to capture the first glimpse of the future king. Catherine's first 3 pregnancies had been heavily documented, with the world watching as she entered and left the Lindo Wing of Street, Mary's Hospital in London, the traditional birthing location for senior royals. This time, however, the approach was different. There was no advance warning that Catherine had gone into labor, no announcement that she had been admitted to the hospital. The public only learned about the birth after it had already happened, through a carefully worded statement confirming that mother and baby were both healthy. The baby's sex was revealed as part of this announcement, confirming that William and Catherine now had 2 daughters to go along with their 2 sons, but one crucial piece of information remained conspicuously absent. The name had not been disclosed. This was unusual even by royal standards. Typically, names were announced within a day or 2 of birth, sometimes even on the same day. The delay sparked immediate speculation, with betting companies offering odds on various paths, possibilities, and baby name websites experiencing unprecedented traffic as people tried to predict what the newest royal would be called. The longer the silence continued, the more intense the speculation became. Prince William spent those days in quiet contemplation. His private study at Kensington Palace, with its view over the gardens and its shelves lined with books on history and constitutional matters, became a refuge where he could think through the decision ahead. The mahogany desk where he often worked had once belonged to his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, and sitting at it reminded him of the continuity he was part of, the long chain of royal history that linked past to future. Choosing a name was not merely about personal preference. Every royal name carried weight, represented connections to previous generations, and sent messages about values and priorities. William thought about his mother Diana and how she had navigated the intense scrutiny that came with every aspect of royal life. He thought about his father, now King Charles, and the expectations that had shaped his entire existence. Most of all, he thought about Catherine and their children, about the family they had built together, despite the enormous pressures and challenges that came with their position. This was about more than just selecting a pleasing combination of syllables. It was about legacy, about honoring those who came before while looking toward an uncertain future. It was about making a statement, however subtle, about what the monarchy stood for and where it was heading. The name they chose would be analyzed by historians, debated by commentators, and remembered long after William and Catherine themselves were gone. Understanding why any royal name matters requires looking back at the long history of the Windsor dynasty and the traditions that have shaped it over generations. Names in the royal family are never chosen casually or simply because they sound pleasant. Each name functions as a message, a declaration of what the family values, and often serves as a subtle political statement that can influence public perception for decades to come. When a royal child is christened, the names selected connect that child to ancestors, establish their place within a complex family tree, and set expectations for the role they might play in the future. Consider Queen Elizabeth, who was born Elizabeth Alexandra Mary in 1926. At the time of her birth, no one expected her to become monarch. Her uncle was king, and it was assumed he would eventually marry and have children who would inherit the throne. But circumstances changed dramatically when Edward abdicated, and suddenly Elizabeth's father became King George VI. The names her parents had chosen took on new significance. Elizabeth connected her to previous queens, particularly Elizabeth I, one of the most successful monarchs in English history. Alexandra honored her great-grandmother, Queen Alexandra, while Mary linked her to her grandmother, Queen Mary. Each name carried weight and meaning that would echo throughout her remarkable 70-year reign. When Prince Charles was born in 1948, his full name was Charles Philip Arthur George. Every single component had been carefully considered. Charles was a bold choice in some ways, given that the previous King Charles II had lived centuries earlier and the name carried complicated historical associations. Philip honored his father, Prince Philip, who had only recently married Princess Elizabeth. Arthur invoked the legendary King Arthur, a name beloved by the British public for its associations with chivalry and national identity. George paid tribute to his grandfather, King George VI, who had died just 4 years later, making the young Charles second in line to the throne. These naming patterns had evolved significantly over the centuries. In earlier periods of British history, names were selected primarily for political reasons, to honor previous monarchs or to strengthen alliances between royal houses. Names like Mary, Elizabeth, James, and Charles appeared repeatedly throughout the family tree, creating a sense of continuity and tradition. Each generation was essentially reinforcing the connection to those who came before, reminding the public that the monarchy represented an unbroken line stretching back through time. The 20th century brought substantial changes to these traditions. Just as it brought changes to virtually every aspect of royal life, Princess Diana played a significant role in this evolution when she and Prince Charles named their sons. William Arthur Philip Louis represented a departure from the heavily Germanic names that had dominated the Windsor family for generations. The choice to use William as the first name rather than relegating it to a middle position signaled something important: a conscious return to English roots and a subtle distancing from the family's German heritage, which had been a source of embarrassment during the World Wars. When Prince Harry was born, his formal name was Henry Charles Albert David, though he was immediately known by the more casual nickname Harry. This choice suggested that Diana and Charles wanted their sons to have some degree of normalcy, even within the extraordinary circumstances of their lives. The use of a friendly nickname rather than insisting on the formal Henry indicated a desire for their children to be approachable, relatable figures rather than distant symbols. Catherine and William continued this evolution when they named their own children. Their first son was christened George Alexander Louis. George was an obvious choice in many ways, honoring the Queen's father and connecting the baby to a line of King George that stretched back through British history. But Alexander had no direct precedent in recent British royal naming conventions, representing a genuinely fresh choice. Louis served multiple purposes, honoring both Prince Philip's uncle, Lord Mountbatten, who had been murdered by the IRA in 1979, and maintaining a connection to French royal history through various Kings Louis. The announcement of their daughter's name in 2015 created enormous public interest. Charlotte, Elizabeth, Diana managed to honor 3 significant women in a single name. Charlotte itself reached back to King George IV's only legitimate daughter, Princess Charlotte, who had died tragically young in childbirth. Elizabeth obviously paid tribute to the reigning queen, William's grandmother, who had been such a towering presence throughout his life. But it was the inclusion of Diana that made headlines around the world. This represented the first official acknowledgement of William's mother in a royal child's name since her death in 1997, a powerful statement about her enduring significance in William's life and her place in royal history. When their third child arrived, Louis Arthur Charles continued the pattern of blending traditional and personal elements. The choice of Louis as a first name rather than a middle name was interesting, suggesting that William and Catherine felt confident enough to make less conventional choices. Arthur maintained that connection to legendary British history, while Charles honored William's father, who would eventually become king. Each of these naming decisions had triggered intense public discussion and analysis. Royal historians wrote lengthy articles examining every possible significance and historical connection. Betting companies had accepted millions of pounds in wagers before each birth, with people placing bets on everything from classic choices like Alice and Mary to more contemporary options like Grace and Poppy. The public seemed to feel a sense of ownership over these decisions, investing emotionally in children they would never meet, but who would one day represent them on the world stage. The pressure William and Catherine faced in choosing a name for their fourth child was therefore immense. A name that seemed too modern might alienate traditionalists who believed the monarchy should maintain its historical character. A name that felt too old-fashioned might suggest the family was out of touch with contemporary Britain, unable to evolve with changing times. Failing to acknowledge certain branches of the family tree could spark accusations of favoritism or disrespect, creating unnecessary tensions within an already complicated family dynamic. William approached the task with characteristic thoroughness, spending hours in the royal archives examining family trees and historical documents. He consulted with historians who could explain the nuances of various names and their associations. Constitutional experts weighed in on whether certain choices might carry unwanted political implications. Every angle had to be considered, every potential criticism anticipated and addressed before the announcement could be made. Catherine brought a different perspective to the discussion. While she certainly understood the historical significance and the need to honor family traditions, she also thought about practical matters. How would the name sound in everyday use? Would their daughter face teasing or bullying because of it? Could it be shortened to a friendly nickname that she might prefer as she grew older? These parental concerns existed alongside the more formal considerations of royal protocol, creating a complex decision-making process that took weeks to navigate. The couple also had to think about the international dimensions of their choice. Although the British monarchy no longer ruled over a vast empire, it remained the symbolic head of the Commonwealth, a voluntary association of 56 nations spanning every continent and representing billions of people. The name they selected would be used and heard by people across vastly different cultures, languages, and contexts. It needed to be pronounceable in multiple languages, culturally sensitive, and capable of representing not just Britain but the diverse Commonwealth that the monarchy now served. There were inevitably disagreements along the way. Catherine loved certain names that William felt were inappropriate for various reasons. William suggested options that Catherine thought didn't feel quite right. Family members offered their opinions, sometimes solicited and sometimes not. King Charles apparently favored certain traditional options that had served the family well in the past. Queen Camilla was said to have advocated for something slightly more contemporary, reflecting the need for the monarchy to stay relevant. Prince Harry, despite the ongoing tensions and distance between the brothers, reportedly sent a private message suggesting a name that held personal significance for both of them. Through all these discussions and debates, William and Catherine kept returning to one fundamental question. What values did they want this name to represent? What message did they want to send about their family, about the monarchy's future, and about the kind of institution they hoped to pass on to the next generation? The answer to that question would ultimately determine which name appeared on the official announcement. The official announcement arrived in the early afternoon, released through channels that had been established and refined over many decades. At exactly 2 o'clock, the Palace Press Office issued a statement to the Press Association, following protocols that ensured major news organizations received the information simultaneously. The wording was elegant and straightforward, designed to convey both the joy of the occasion and the appropriate sense of dignity that royal announcements require. The statement read that the Prince and Princess of Wales were delighted to announce their daughter had been named Rose Alice Diana. 3 names, each one carrying multiple layers of meaning that would fuel discussion and analysis for weeks and months to come. The choice of Rose as the first name immediately sent ripples through royal circles and captured public attention in ways that surprised even seasoned observers. Unlike the names chosen for their previous children, which had clear and obvious precedents in recent royal history, Rose represented something genuinely different. It was simultaneously traditional and fresh, familiar yet distinctive enough to feel like a meaningful departure from established patterns. Rose evoked the very symbol of England itself, the Tudor rose. That combination of red and white roses that had ended the Wars of the Roses and established a new dynasty under Henry VII remained one of the most powerful symbols in English history. It represented the resolution of conflict, the unity of previously warring factions, and the beginning of a period that would see England emerge as a major European power. By choosing this name, William and Catherine were connecting their daughter to centuries of English identity and national symbolism. But the name also carried deeply personal significance. Rose honored Catherine's grandmother, Rose Asquith, a woman who had played an important role in shaping Catherine's early years. This grandmother had instilled values of family loyalty and quiet strength that had served Catherine remarkably well during her years in the royal spotlight. The choice demonstrated that even within the constraints of royal naming conventions, there was room for genuine personal meaning and family connection. The name carried other historical resonances as well. Rose Gilman had been one of the Queen Mother's closest friends, providing unwavering support during the difficult years of World War II, when the royal family faced genuine threats to their safety and uncertain prospects for the monarchy's future. There was also Rose Windsor, a more distant cousin whose grace and discretion had made her a beloved figure within extended family circles. The name managed to thread a delicate needle, being traditional enough to satisfy those who wanted continuity with the past while feeling contemporary enough to appeal to younger generations. Alice, the first middle name, brought equally significant meaning to the combination. Most obviously and importantly, it honored Princess Alice of Battenberg, Prince Philip's mother, and a woman whose remarkable life story had only recently received the widespread recognition it deserved. Princess Alice had been born deaf, yet she learned to lip read in multiple languages and became a formidable presence in European royal circles despite this disability. Her courage extended far beyond personal challenges, though. During the Nazi occupation of Greece in World War II, she had hidden a Jewish family in her palace, risking her own life to save others, at a time when such actions required extraordinary bravery. Princess Alice's later years had been devoted to charitable work and religious service. She founded a nursing order and spent decades helping those in need, living modestly despite her royal status. Her story represented exactly the kind of values that William and Catherine hoped to instill in their children. Courage in the face of adversity, compassion that translated into concrete action rather than mere words, and a commitment to service that went beyond ceremonial duties and photo opportunities. The name Alice connected their daughter to this legacy of meaningful action and moral courage. But Alice also reached further back into British royal history. Princess Alice, known as Alice Maud Mary, had been Queen Victoria's third child, and one of the most influential royals of her generation. She had used her position to advance causes she believed in, refusing to be confined by the limited expectations placed on women of her era. She had been involved in nursing and hospital reform, educational initiatives, and various charitable endeavors. The name connected the new princess to this legacy of female royal agency and activism, suggesting that she might follow in the footsteps of ancestors who had pushed boundaries and challenged conventions about what royal women could and should do. Diana, the second middle name, came as no surprise to anyone following royal news, yet it still managed to create deep emotional responses. William had already honored his mother when Charlotte was given Diana as a middle name, but the inclusion of Diana in his second daughter's name underscored her enduring significance. 27 years after her death in that Paris tunnel, Diana remained one of the most beloved and simultaneously controversial figures in modern British history. Her name instantly conjured images and memories for millions of people around the world. Diana had revolutionized what it meant to be a royal in the modern age. She had brought warmth and accessibility to an institution that had often seemed cold and distant. Her willingness to break protocol, to hug aides, patients when fear and stigma surrounded the disease, to walk through minefields to draw attention to the weapons that continued killing people long after conflicts ended, these actions had demonstrated that royalty could be a force for genuine good in the world. But her story also included tremendous personal struggles, a difficult marriage that played out in public, battles with mental health, and complicated relationships with the media that both elevated and ultimately destroyed her. By naming their daughter Rose Alice Diana, William and Catherine were ensuring that the next generation would carry forward Diana's memory, and, they hoped, her commitment to using royal privilege to make tangible differences in people's lives. The name served as a declaration that Diana's contributions to modernizing the monarchy would not be forgotten or diminished, that her legacy was secure and would continue to influence how the royal family approached its role in the 21st century. The public reaction was immediate. and overwhelming. Within minutes of the announcement, Rose began trending on social media platforms worldwide. The name shot to the top of discussions on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, with millions of people sharing their thoughts and reactions. Florists reported unexpected surges in orders for roses of every color and variety, with some shops selling out their entire stock within hours. Baby name websites experienced technical difficulties as their servers crashed under the weight of traffic from expectant parents rushing to add Rose to their own shortlists or to read about the name's history and meaning. Royal correspondents found themselves scrambling to provide context and analysis for audiences hungry to understand every nuance of the decision. Television networks interrupted their regular programming to discuss the announcement, bringing on experts to explain the historical significance of each name component. Some praised the choice as inspired, a perfect balance between honoring the past and looking toward the future. These commentators highlighted how the name managed to satisfy traditionalists while still feeling relevant to contemporary Britain. Others offered more critical perspectives, suggesting that William and Catherine had played it too safe, that they had missed an opportunity to make a bolder statement about the monarchy's evolution and its willingness to break with outdated conventions. A few contrarians argued that any royal naming convention was inherently problematic, representing a perpetuation of hereditary privilege that had no place in a modern democracy. These voices, while relatively few, received significant attention in certain media outlets and online communities. Within the royal family itself, reactions were more private but no less significant. King Charles released a brief public statement expressing his delight at his granddaughter's name, noting that it honored multiple branches of the family tree, in ways that spoke to the unity and continuity he had long championed. Queen Camilla was photographed leaving Clarence House with a broad smile, though she declined to comment to the waiting press photographers who shouted questions at her. Prince Harry and Meghan sent a private message of congratulations from their home in California. This rare communication between the brothers, whose relationship had been strained for years by various disagreements, and Harry's departure from royal duties, was notable in itself. While the message remained confidential, sources close to the situation suggested it was warm and genuine, focusing on the joy of new life rather than dwelling on past disagreements and tensions. Princess Anne, staying true to her characteristically direct personality, offered what was described as a dry but approving assessment when asked about the name during a public engagement. Those who knew Anne understood that her measured response actually constituted high praise, as she was not known for excessive enthusiasm or unnecessary commentary on family matters. The christening of Princess Rose Alice Diana took place 6 weeks after her birth, following a tradition that stretched back through centuries of royal history. The Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace provided the setting, its ancient walls and intimate atmosphere having witnessed countless significant moments in the lives of the Windsor family and their predecessors. The same chapel had hosted the christenings of Rose's older siblings, creating a sense of continuity and family tradition that both William and Catherine valued deeply. The guest list reflected the personal nature of the occasion rather than any political or social obligations. Unlike some royal events, where attendance could be dictated by protocol and diplomatic considerations, this was deliberately kept small and intimate. Close family members were present, along with a carefully selected group of godparents chosen not for their titles or social standing but for their personal significance to William and Catherine. These were people who had supported the couple through various challenges, who had demonstrated loyalty and discretion, and who could be trusted to play meaningful roles in Rose's life as she grew. The photographs released after the ceremony told their own story about the Wales family and what they hoped to project to the world. Rose appeared peaceful and content in the historic Honiton lace christening gown that had been worn by generations of royal babies. This particular gown was actually a replica of the original Victorian gown, which had become too fragile for continued use. The replica had been commissioned by the Queen and first used for the christening of James, Viscount Severn, in 2008. Every royal baby since then had worn the same gown, creating a visual link between cousins and siblings across the family. Catherine held her daughter with visible tenderness, her smile radiating a contentment that seemed genuinely felt rather than performed for the cameras. After 4 pregnancies and the challenges of raising children under constant public scrutiny, She appeared completely comfortable in her role as a mother. William stood beside her, one hand resting protectively on George's shoulder, while his other hand held Charlotte's. Louis, now old enough to be curious about his new sister, peered at Rose with the kind of intense concentration that young children bring to examining anything new and interesting. The image was carefully composed but felt natural, a balance that the palace communications team had worked hard to achieve over the years. It showed a family that was united, loving, and grounded, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their lives. This was exactly the kind of message that William and Catherine wanted to convey, that beneath the titles and the ceremonial duties, they were fundamentally a normal family dealing with the same joys and challenges that any family with 4 children might face. But even as these official photographs circulated around the world and commentators praised the dignity and warmth of the occasion, fundamental questions about Rose's future remained open and unanswered. What role would she ultimately play in the royal family's ongoing evolution? How would she navigate the peculiar challenges of being born into immense privilege while simultaneously being expected to justify that privilege through a lifetime of service? What causes might she champion as she grew older? What kind of person would she become? And how much of that would be shaped by her royal status versus her own individual personality and choices? History offered some guidance, but no definitive roadmap for answering these questions. Princess Anne had forged a remarkable path as the Princess Royal, becoming arguably the hardest working member of the entire royal family. She attended more engagements than almost anyone else, supported hundreds of charities and organizations, and maintained an impressive commitment to duty year after year. Yet she had also fiercely protected her privacy, avoiding unnecessary media attention and living her life according to her own principles rather than public expectations. Her approach demonstrated that it was possible to fulfill royal obligations while maintaining personal boundaries and dignity. Princess Margaret offered a contrasting example, having chosen a different path that brought both glamour and considerable difficulty. She had been a fashion icon and cultural figure, moving in artistic and social circles that fascinated the public. But her life had also included scandal, complicated relationships, and what appeared from the outside to be considerable unhappiness. Her story served as a cautionary tale about the costs of trying to live a conventional life while carrying the weight of royal status and public attention. More recently, Lady Louise Windsor and her brother James provided yet another model for how younger royals might approach their roles. Despite being grandchildren of Queen Elizabeth, they had lived relatively normal lives, attending regular schools and pursuing their own interests. They participated in royal events when called upon, appearing at significant occasions like the late Queen's funeral and major family celebrations, but otherwise maintained privacy and independence that previous generations of royals could hardly have imagined. William and Catherine had discussed all these precedents extensively as they thought about their children's futures. They understood that they could not simply impose predetermined paths on any of their children, including Rose. Each child would need to discover their own way forward, developing their own interests and making their own choices about how to balance royal duty with personal fulfillment. The key, they believed, was to instill the right foundational values early in life. If they could teach their children that privilege came with responsibility, that being royal was fundamentally about service rather than status, then the specific paths each child took would follow naturally from those core principles. The broader question of the monarchy's future loomed over all these considerations. Public opinion polling showed that support for the royal family remained strong, particularly among older citizens who had grown up with the Queen as a constant presence. But younger generations were increasingly questioning whether Britain needed a monarchy at all in the 21st century. They asked legitimate questions about the cost of maintaining the institution, about whether hereditary privilege had any place in a modern democracy, and about whether the royal family truly earned the deference and resources it received. The Platinum Jubilee celebrations in 2022 had demonstrated that genuine affection for the monarchy still existed. Millions of people had participated in street parties and celebrations, coming together to honor the Queen's 7 decades of service. But astute observers noted that much of this enthusiasm was focused on Elizabeth herself rather than the institution she represented. The question of whether similar support would continue after her death remained uncertain. though the period following her passing in September 2022 had shown remarkable public grief and engagement with royal events. William and Catherine understood that they represented the monarchy's best hope for maintaining public support in the coming decades. Opinion polls consistently showed them at the top of royal approval ratings, well ahead of other senior members of the family. Their marriage appeared stable and loving in ways that resonated with ordinary people who had watched too many royal relationships crumble under pressure. Their children seemed remarkably grounded despite growing up in palaces and being waited on by staff. The couple had successfully navigated various scandals and controversies, from the phone hacking revelations to the departure of Harry and Meghan, maintaining their dignity and focus on their duties throughout. Rose's birth and the choice of her name fit into this broader strategy of managed evolution. By selecting a name that honored multiple strands of royal history while still feeling contemporary and accessible, they demonstrated that the monarchy could adapt to changing times without abandoning its essential character. By welcoming a fourth child when many had assumed their family was complete, they showed that royal families could make personal choices based on their own desires rather than simply following predetermined scripts written by tradition and protocol. But strategy and careful planning could only accomplish so much. Rose was not simply a symbol to be deployed in service of institutional goals. She was a human being with her own emerging personality, her own eventual interests and passions, her own dreams about what her life might become. She might embrace royal life enthusiastically, finding genuine fulfillment in the opportunities it provided to make positive differences in the world. Or she might chafe against its constraints, finding the constant attention and limited privacy unbearable as she grew older. She might remain in Britain, dedicating herself to supporting her brother when he eventually became king. Or she might seek opportunities abroad, building a life that allowed for more independence and autonomy. The name Rose Alice Diana gave her a framework and a legacy to draw upon, connecting her to powerful women who had shaped history through their courage, compassion, and commitment to causes larger than themselves. But ultimately, the name could not determine her destiny or dictate the choices she would make. That would be up to Rose herself, shaped by her upbringing but not imprisoned by it, influenced by her family's history but not bound to simply repeat it. As William held his youngest daughter in the quiet, moments after the christening ceremony ended, he made private promises that no one else would ever hear. He promised to protect her as much as any father possibly could in a world that would be endlessly curious about every aspect of her life. He promised to teach her that her title represented both opportunity and obligation, privilege and responsibility intertwined. Most importantly, he promised to love her unconditionally, supporting whatever path she ultimately chose for herself, whether that meant embracing royal duties wholeheartedly or forging a different kind of life away from the spotlight. The revelation of Rose Alice Diana's name marked not an ending but a beginning. As the Wales family continued to grow and evolve, so too would the monarchy's ongoing story. Only time would reveal what role this fourth princess would play in shaping Britain's future, but the name she carried would inspire, challenge, and endure for generations to come.